So if you recall in one of my earlier videos, I introduced you to a good first-time knitting project. It was a garter stitch scarf. So if you've completed that project and you'd like to try something a little bit more challenging, then I suggest project number 2, a Slouchy beanie. Now, a beanie is a good first-time knitting project for a couple of reasons. It knits up quickly. You can get one done in a day or a couple of days. Doesn't require a lot of fancy tricks either. It is a little bit more advanced than a garter stitch scarf, however, because it does introduce a few new concepts. For this, you will need to know the purl stitch, how to do ribbing, how to decrease, and how to seam your project together. Now, I've already uploaded a video on the purl stitch. You can find that here. There'll be a link here. But this video is going to cover then the other 3 topics: how to do ribbing, decreasing, and seaming it together at the end. I have a written pattern for this that you can get. There's a link in the description box below. Go get that. Get your needles and your yarn, and meet me back here, and we will go through the project together. Hurry up. We don't have all day. So here's the pattern printed out. Let's take a look at this here and make sure we understand everything. Your materials, 100-gram ball of yarn. It really, you're not going to use the whole ball of yarn. You can probably get a couple of hats out of one ball of yarn for most, depending on the tightness of your knit and your gauge and everything. Size 8 knitting needles, and these can be either straight knitting needles or circular knitting needles, like these here. Now, you are not going to knit this in the round, though. This is a beginner project. It's very simple. The note here says this pattern is knitted flat and then it's seamed together to finish. So you actually knit it as one flat piece, and then if you notice here on the back there is a seam that we'll go over how to seam this together. Now, this one isn't the best done, but yeah, ignore that. So it is open, one flat large piece, and then you fold the raw edges together and you seam it down the back to make it into a round hat. So let's talk about our first new concept, and that is the concept of ribbing. Now, ribbing is this section here at the brim of the hat. This is what gives the hat some stretchiness around your head, and it keeps the hat from rolling up and coming off of your head. It kind of grips a little bit. You know, ribbing is on sweaters, usually around the cuffs or around the bottom of the sweater, or on socks around the top of the sock to kind of keep it gripped against your skin. So that's what this serves the purpose for. Okay, so to do ribbing, it is basically just alternating between knit stitches and purl stitches. Now, your pattern says that you'll be doing 2x2 ribbing, and what that means is you will be doing 2 stitches that are knit, 2 stitches that are purl. You'll just be alternating 2 and 2, okay? So let's look at that on how we do that on a sample here. Okay? If I'm going to do 2x2 ribbing, I'm going to start with 2 knit stitches. And remember, knit stitch, we put the needle through from front to back. We wrap our yarn around, pull it through, and slide it off. And then do a second knit stitch the same way. Now, we've done our 2 knits, we've got to switch over to our 2 purls. To switch, remember, the purl stitch, the yarn has to be in the front of the needle to do the purl stitch. So to get the yarn to the front, we just grab our working yarn and we put it between our 2 needles and bring it to the front of the project. and then do our purl stitch. Wrap it around and pull it through and slide it off. And then our second purl stitch. Then we bring the yarn back through the needles to the back and do our next 2 knit stitches. And then bring it back through to the front and do our 2 purl stitches again. And we just alternate this way all the way across the row. Until we get to the very end. And then we turn our work. Now, when we do our next side, basically knits and purls are opposites of each other, okay? So we have to look here. If the last time on the back row we ended with 2 knit stitches, when we turn it over, we're not going to start with knit stitches again, because those 2 stitches were knit last time. They're going to be purl this time because we're on the opposite side. So I'll start with 2 purl stitches then. Basically, whatever the stitch was on the other side, you knit the opposite on the second side. So 2 purl stitches. And this will get easier to see as your project grows. As you get more rows on there, you'll be able to see what the previous stitch looked like before a little easier. And I'll show you that here in a second. Finish this row. Okay. So when we turn our work then, so the next side you'll be able to see, you can see here, that's a knit stitch, so that means these 2 need to be knit. That's a purl bump, so those 2 need to be purl. And then there's 2 knit stitches again, so those 2 need to be knit. So you'll be able to see as it goes. And then you'll get these rows of knit stitches and purl stitches. And what happens, wherever there was a purl stitch, it pulls the yarn back to the opposite side and will pull these together, which makes the brim a little tighter on your head and gives it some stretchiness too. Okay? So, with our project, it tells you to cast on 86 stitches. So you're going to cast on your 86 stitches, and then you're going to knit those in 2x2 ribbing until it measures 1.5 inches. Now, that is also entirely up to you. 1.5 inches is usually about what I do. And actually with this one I didn't even measure, but it looks like it's, yeah, pretty much 1.5, maybe 1 3/4 inches. However thick you want your brim to be. If you want it to be, a 2-inch brim, 4-inch brim, that's totally fine. You just knit it however long you want it. I just typically like a 1.5 inch to 2-inch brim at the bottom. So you knit it for that length, and then you switch to our next section, which is stockinette stitch. So work on the brim, and when you get it to the length you want, meet me back here, and we will continue on with our project. So in the next part of this, we've knit the brim as far as we want it to be, and we're going to switch now to stockinette stitch. Okay. Now, when you finish your 1.5 inches of the brim, it's helpful to make sure that the last row that you did was a wrong side row. That would just make the finished edge look nicer. And I'll show you here. I like this to be the right side. My cast on edge, I like the look of this versus this side where it's all kind of bumpy looking. I like that little twisted edge, so I make that one be my right side row. So I end on a wrong side row so that my next row will be a right side row. If it's a right side row, that normally means we are going to knit the stitches. There'll be knits on the right side, purls on the wrong side. Okay? So to stop knitting your stockinette and to go, or to stop knitting your ribbing and to go into stockinette, you basically just stop that pattern and start the new one. So we're going to knit all of these stitches. And we'll knit them all the way across the row, putting it through from front to back, wrapping it around, pulling it through, and sliding the old loop off. And once we have that row knit, we will flip our work around and we're going to purl this side. And our yarn is already in the front, so we just put the needle through from back to front and purl these stitches across the row. And that's stockinette. You do knits on one side, purl on the other side. So you'll continue in this pattern until your hat measures 6 inches from the cast on edge, which means this is our project. We're going to measure from here 6 inches, and once we reach 6 inches we'll end with the wrong side row, and then we're going to start our decreases, which is the next little complicated portion of that. Okay, so knit your hat until it's 6 inches long, and then meet me back here. Alright, so I'm switching to an unfinished project here. I've knit this, and I should correct myself, I was saying 6 inches before, it's till it's 6.5 inches. And then we start our decrease. So here's what our project looks like so far. It's knit flat, 6.5 inches wide, or 6.5 inches tall. And we're going to start decreasing now to get to the top part, so that we have this nice rounded top to our beanie. So let's look at the decreasing. The decreasing takes place over 17 rows. You see here in the pattern, it starts here, continues into the next column here. And the first part of the decrease says we are going to knit 1 stitch, and then it says knit 8 stitches, SSK, which is a decrease. Knit 1, knit 2 together. Now, when you decrease, all decreases make your stitches lean either to one side or the other, depending on which type of decrease that you're doing. So in this pattern, we've taken advantage of that to kind of give a nice little design element. And if you can see here, we have these decreases leaning this way to the left. Then we have a column of just straight knit stitches, and then the decreases on the other side lean to the opposite direction to kind of give you this look here that's a little nicer looking than just decreasing all the same direction. Okay, so the first decrease is an SSK, which stands for slip, slip, knit. Then we're going to knit 1 just regular, and then we're going to knit 2 together, and then finish up with a knit 8. And we do this section that's in the brackets here 4 times back to back. And then once we've done that 4 times, we knit just 1 stitch by itself. Okay, so let me do that with you here. So we're going to knit 1, which is the first part of that. Oops, I'm bumping my camera here. We're going to knit 1, then we're going to knit 8. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? Then we're going to do our first decrease, which is a slip, slip, knit. Okay? And the way I do slip, slip knits is I put my yarn or my needle in like I'm going to knit it, but then I don't actually knit this stitch. Instead, my cat has come to say hello to us. Instead, what I do is I just slip that off onto the needle instead of actually knitting it. And then I do that again with the next stitch. So that's the slip part. Okay? Then I'm going to knit these two together, what's called knitting together through the back loop. Okay? And what that means is I take my left needle here, put it back through both of those stitches, making sure that my working needle is in the back. So you see that my left hand needle is in the front, the other needle's in the back. I wrap that around and then I knit it just like I normally would knit. Okay? Then we're going to knit the next one just plain. And then we're going to knit two together. And to knit two together, that one's fairly simple. Instead of just knitting one stitch, I'm going to put the needle through both stitches like I would regularly be knitting from front to back. Wrap that around and knit those two together. And then we finish up with knit 8. Seven, 8. So let's do that again because we have to do that decrease 4 times. Okay, so we're on our second time now. So we start at the beginning of the brackets and we're going to knit 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now we're going to do our slip, slip, knit. So we slip 1, slip 2, we put our left needle back in to the front of the other needle, and then we knit with that back needle. Then we're going to knit 1 just plain, and then we're going to knit these two together. We just stick the needle through both of those stitches at the same time and knit them regularly. And then we finish up that bracket by knitting 8. And there's 8. Okay, so that's our second time of doing that bracket. So here's the third time. We're going to start with knitting 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we're going to slip, slip, and then put the left needle back through them and knit them together. And we're going to knit 1 and then knit these two together. Try not to split my threads here. And then finish up that bracket by knitting 8. 5, 6, 7, and 8. And now we're going to do our last time through that decrease bracket. Start by knitting 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we do our slip, slip, knit through the back loop, knit 1 regularly, and then knit 2 together, and then finish up with our 8. 6, 7, 8. And then that leaves one stitch left, and if you notice in the decrease row, we just knit that last stitch. And that's our first row of decrease. Now, the decreases are only going to happen on the right side of the fabric. Every other row, look at your pattern here, every even row, which is the wrong side rows, you're just going to purl those stitches straight across. Nothing fancy happens on the wrong side row. For the second row of decrease, it starts out the same. You're going to always knit that first stitch. With our decrease brackets now, the number that we're knitting before the slips of knit has decreased because we've taken a stitch away. We took a stitch away here, and we took a stitch away here. So that means the number of stitches before that slips of knit is going to decrease, and it decreases by 1 each time, all the way through the pattern. So the next time it happens the exact same way. You just knit 7 before you do the slip slip knit, and then you knit 1, knit 2 together, and then you knit 7. And you do that 4 times. And then knit your final stitch of the row after you've done your 4 times of the bracket. You purl the next row, and then row number 5, you knit the first stitch, and then now you're knitting 6 before you do the slip slip knit, and after you do the knit 2 together. And then you'll do that 4 times, purl your row number 6, and then row number 7 does knit 5 before the slip slip knit. And then row 9 is knit 4 before the slip slip knit. So then eventually you will come down to the final row, which is knit 1, and then you don't knit any before the slip slip knit. You just do slip slip knit, knit 1, knit 2 together, and you do that 4 times, and then knit your final 1 stitch. So work on that, and when you're done with that, meet me back here, and we will finish this up together. Alright, so here we are in the home stretch with our hat here. So we have just finished up the last row of the decrease, and we have just a few stitches left on the needle here. Okay, you're going to cut your yarn. The pattern says about 18 inches to give you enough to work with here, and then you're going to need a yarn needle, which is basically like a regular needle. It's got a blunter tip on it and a larger eye to accommodate the size of the yarn. So you are going to thread your yarn onto this needle, and how I like to do this is hold the needle kind of sideways, take the yarn and fold it over the edge, and then pinch it, and that gives you kind of a flat piece, and then you can stick that through the eye hole there. Okay, so once you have that threaded on, we're not going to cast this off like we do other knitting projects. Okay, what we are going to do is take this needle and we're going to slide all of these stitches off onto the needle. Just move them all from the knitting needle over to the yarn needle. Okay, and then you're going to pull that needle through, pulling all of that yarn through, and you're going to cinch up the top of the hat by pulling that yarn. Okay, so that closes up that hole at the top of the hat. Then we need to seam this together. We still have these 2 open raw edges here. Okay, we're going to do something called a mattress stitch. So you're going to put your piece down. You're going to take your needle, and if you look down the side here, you see the row of knit stitches. That was that first knit stitch and the last knit stitch of the pattern of each row. You're going to stick this in to one of those little V's and pop it back out a V, maybe 2-3 rows down. So we go in one and back out through one a few rows down. Pull the yarn up through that, and then go over to the other side and go down the exact same one. So you go in your first one, And back out your third one. And pull it closed. Okay. Then you're going to come back to this side, and you'll see where your previous stitch that you did came out. You're going to go right back down that same one that you came out of last time. Go down 3 rows, pull it up, move back over, go out the same one that you came out of last time, or go back in the same one you came out of last time on that side. Go down your 3 rows, and pull it closed. And this gives you kind of an invisible looking seam, and it's helpful with things like hats that have stripes on them. It helps keep the stripes lined up as long as you are doing it properly. Now, sometimes I will admit I have a little trouble with this and my seams get a little wonky if that happens. Don't worry about it, it's not a big deal, because this is the back of the hat anyway, and if it's a slouchy beanie, it's going to be folded over on itself and you're never going to see it. But you simply just continue like that all the way down, going in the previous one that you came out of. Go down a couple rows. Cinch it closed. Alright, so we're coming here to the end. I'm just gonna finish up these last few stitches here, making sure that my ribbing is lining up with the other side. Those are the last stitches. Now, of course, we have to do something with this yarn here. What I like to do is my beginning yarn that I started with, and then my end yarn, I like to tie a little knot here with the two of them, just in case they ever decide to unravel. And then I'm going to weave these ends into the back, or into the inside of the hat here. So I just take my yarn, put it through these end stitches a couple times just to kind of cinch them over together. Oop, and my yarn just broke, which is fine. I'll just tie this off here and I'll weave in the other one. And I just take this other one and I just put it through my seam a few times. Just to make sure that it stays in place. And the last time that I put it through, I make kind of a loop, stick the yarn back through it, and tie it off like a little knot there. And then you can either cut it or just break it off. And there, you see the seam, you know, as I said, my seaming isn't always the greatest, but it's fairly invisible, the seam, especially if you have like a variegated yarn like that. But there is the finished hat.